Have you ever read a centuries-old poem or maybe looked at a painting from a completely different era and felt like the creator was speaking directly to a problem you had like this very morning?
Oh yeah, that sudden, undeniable jolt of recognition that hits you out of nowhere.
Exactly. And you realize, wait, that isn't just a happy accident of interpretation, and it certainly isn't a phenomenon you can measure with a beaker or, track on a spreadsheet.
Definitely not. You can't quantify that feeling.
Right. So today we are exploring the exact mechanics of how truth exists completely outside the confines of a science lab.
We are tackling a massive question here. Like, how do we actually understand anything at all?
Which is a huge question.
It is. And more importantly, how do we arrive at truths that the scientific method is entirely blind to? Because, let's face it, the modern world has essentially been trained to believe that if you can't measure it,
Right, if you can't replicate it and isolate the variables.
exactly, then it isn't true knowledge. It's just, well, subjective feeling.
Which is so limiting. So welcome to this custom deep dive. Today we are taking on a titan of 20th century philosophy.
A true heavyweight.
Yeah, we are looking at Hans-Georg Gadamer's absolute masterpiece, Truth and Method.
Just an incredible foundational text.
It really is. And our sources for you today are comprehensive. We're covering the prefaces, the introduction, all three main parts of the book, and the afterword.
So we are really getting into the weeds here.
We're doing the full tour. And our mission is to explore Gadamer's monumental argument that human beings understand art, history, and each other through a process that completely defies scientific induction.
Right, he's going after the whole scientific paradigm of truth.
Yeah, we're going to prove that your biases and your historical baggage, the things you've been told to suppress in the name of, like, objectivity, are not actually obstacles to understanding.
That's the crazy part. They're the very tools that make understanding possible.
It is a radical overturning of how we think about knowledge.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, Gadamer's entire project is born out of a deep resistance to the monopoly of modern science.
But just to be clear, he isn't, like, anti-science.
Right? Oh, no, not at all. He respects science. But he is fundamentally opposed to the idea that the inductive method of the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, meteorology.
Right, the hard sciences.
Yeah, he doesn't think those methods should be the universal yardstick for all human inquiry.
Which brings up this really fascinating historical irony Gadamer points out right at the beginning of the text regarding the term human sciences.
Oh, this is such a great linguistic quirk.
Right, so the Germans use the word Geisteswissenschaften, which essentially translates to sciences of the spirit.
Which sounds very romantic and deep.
It does. But the term originally gained traction in Germany as a translation of the English philosopher John Stuart Mill's phrase, moral sciences.
And Mill's agenda was, well, basically the exact opposite of Gadamer's.
Totally. Mill wanted to prove that you could and should study human society, history, and behavior using the exact same inductive methods you use to study the weather.
Yeah, Mill wanted to find the regularities in human behavior. You gather empirical data, you trace the causal links, and you predict outcomes.
Like tracking a storm system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Gadamer argues that by forcing the humanities into this inductive, methodological box, we severely distort what the humanities actually do.
Because humans aren't storm systems.
Right. If you try to study the French Revolution or a Shakespearean sonnet the way a meteorologist studies a cold front, you completely miss the truth of the event.
You miss the point entirely.
Yeah, the human sciences deal with philosophy, art, and history. These are realms where truths are communicated that just cannot be verified by the methodological means proper to science.
Okay, so the English translators of Truth and Method actually dedicate a massive portion of their preface to a specific linguistic hurdle that perfectly illustrates this clash.
It's a great preface. They really nail this distinction.
It revolves around the English word experience. In English, we use that one word for, well, literally everything.
We really do. It's a catch-all.
Right. You experience a flat tire, you experience a mild headache, and you experience a profound, life-altering grief. It's all just experience.
But Gadamer, writing in German, uses two distinct words. He uses Erlebnis and Erfahrung.
And the difference between them is basically the key to his entire philosophy.
It is vital. So science loves Erlebnis.
Unpack that for me. What is Erlebnis?
Erlebnis refers to an isolated, discrete moment. It is an experience you have.
Like an event.
Yeah, it's an immediate subjective feeling or event that you can point to. It's episodic. You can put it in a box, label it, and measure its effects.
Okay, let's use an analogy. So an Lebanese is like going to Paris for a weekend, taking a quick photo of the Eiffel Tower, eating a croissant, and coming home.
Perfect example. You had that experience.
Right, I acquired it like a souvenir. I was an isolated subject, observing an object.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Erfahrung is entirely different. Erfahrung isn't something you possess. It's an ongoing, integrative process that you undergo.
So using the Paris analogy, Erfahrung would be like moving to Paris for 3 years.
Yes. Moving there, struggling with the language, getting lost in the culture, and eventually realizing that your entire worldview has been permanently altered.
Oh, wow. So you don't have an Erfahrung.
No, you are transformed by it.
That is a massive difference.
That captures the mechanism perfectly, yeah. In Erfahrung, subjectivity is overcome. You are drawn into an event of meaning.
It sounds almost painful.
It can be. Gadamer actually points out that true Erfahrung is fundamentally negative.
Negative how?
Well, it involves the painful but necessary realization that your previous expectations were wrong. Your horizon is forced to widen.
Oh, I see. You have to admit you didn't know everything.
Right. And science, by its very nature, tries to eliminate that subjective transformation.
Mm.
It wants repeatable objective data. It wants the snapshot.
It's once the weekend in Paris, not the 3-year struggle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But true hermeneutic understanding, which is the art of interpretation, requires the vulnerability of Erfahrung.
Okay, so if Erfahrung is this rich, transformative process that is so natural to human life, how did we become so obsessed with the snapshot version?
That's the big historical question.
Right. Why did we start treating knowledge as a collection of isolated data points rather than an ongoing transformation of the self?
To understand that shift, Gadamer takes us back to the humanist tradition, and specifically to how the Enlightenment derailed our understanding of the humanities.
Ah, the Enlightenment. Always causing trouble for philosophers.
Well, it championed critical reason and the scientific method above all else. And figures in the 19th century, like Hermann von Helmholtz, recognized that historical knowledge felt different from natural science.
So Helmholtz knew something was off.
He did. But Helmholtz still tried to map it onto Immanuel Kant's rigid distinctions. He was basically treating the humanities as a lesser, fuzzier version of scientific empiricism.
So Helmholtz essentially conceded that the humanities couldn't produce clean data, so they must rely on a sort of, I don't know, psychological tact or intuition.
Exactly. He gave up the ground of truth to science. But Gadamer completely rejects that concession.
He fights back.
He does. He dusts off these older, profound humanist concepts to demonstrate that the human sciences possess their own rigorous, legitimate claim to truth.
And he starts with the concept of Bildung, right?
Yes, Bildung. We usually translate it as culture or education.
But in the modern sense, education usually just means acquiring technical skills, right? Like getting certified to do a job.
Yeah, modern education is heavily oriented toward utility, but Bildung is profoundly different. Gadamer defines it as the uniquely human way of developing one's natural talents and capacities.
Because it's not just a toolkit you acquire.
Not at all. Bildung is a process of alienation and return.
Okay, walk me through that mechanism. Alienation and return, how does that actually work when I'm, say, studying ancient Greek history?
So when you encounter something truly alien-like, a foreign culture, a complex piece of art, or a text from 2,000 years ago, you are initially estranged.
Right, it feels weird. It doesn't make sense.
Exactly, it doesn't fit your immediate worldview. But if you engage with it deeply, you lose yourself in that otherness. You learn their concepts, their struggles, their perspectives.
You can sort of live in their world for a bit.
Yes. And then, crucially, you return to yourself. But you are no longer the same person.
Oh, because the experience changed you.
Precisely. You haven't just memorized facts about ancient Greece. You have incorporated a new way of seeing into your own being. You are cultivated.
That makes perfect sense. It's why memorizing dates for a history exam is forgotten a week later. But a historical novel that forces you to live inside a different century changes how you view modern politics forever.
That's a great way to put it. Building is the formation of the self without ever severing ties from your past.
And this connects deeply to another humanist concept Gadamer revives, right? Giambattista Vico's idea of the sensus communis.
Yes, the sensus communis.
Because in English, common sense usually just means basic practical logic, like, knowing not to wear shorts in a blizzard.
Right, but Vico's sensus communis is infinitely richer than basic survival logic. Vico was defending the old rhetorical humanist tradition against the new Cartesian critical science of his day.
So René Descartes is the antagonist here.
Very much so. Descartes had convinced the intellectual world that only things proven through radical doubt and mathematical certainty were true.
Everything else is just opinion.
Right. But Vico pushed back, arguing that human society doesn't run on mathematical certainty. It runs on sensus communis, which is the sense of the community.
A communal sense.
Yes, it is a shared communal moral solidarity.
A shared instinct for what is convincing or appropriate. But wait, let me push back here. If it's just an instinct, a sense of the community, doesn't that just mean mob rule?
Ah, I see what you mean.
Like whatever the dominant culture decides is right. How is that a mechanism for truth?
It's not mob rule, because it is cultivated through Bildung. It's educated. Sensus communis is the intuitive grasp of the right thing to do in a complex social reality, which cannot be captured by an abstract scientific formula.
So science is blind to this kind of truth.
Completely.
Mm.
Science can tell you how to build a nuclear reactor. Science cannot tell you whether you should build one,
Wow.
or how to comfort a grieving friend, or what constitutes a just law. Those truths require a moral faculty developed within a community.
Which naturally leads Gadamer to the concepts of judgment and taste.
Yes, taste.
And I have to admit, when I hit this part of the text, I felt massive resistance.
You're not alone in that.
Because when I hear the word taste, I immediately think of subjective preference. If I say a specific indie film is a masterpiece, and you say it's pretentious garbage, we just have different tastes.
Right, it's just a flavor.
Yeah. Neither of us is objectively right or wrong. It's just a feeling.
That instinct you have, that taste is purely subjective and cannot claim universal truth, is precisely the historical crisis Gadamer is trying to solve.
Oh, really? So my instinct is the problem.
Well, it's a very modern instinct,
Good.
and Gadamer traces the blame for that instinct directly to Immanuel Kant.
Kant again. He's everywhere.
He really is the turning point.
Ah.
Prior to Kant, taste was not considered merely a personal preference for, a flavor of ice cream.
What was it then?
In the older humanist tradition, taste was a profound moral and social faculty. It was a way of knowing the world.
So it had objective weight.
Yes.
Ah.
A person with good taste was someone whose individual judgment aligned with the deeper moral realities of the sensus communis.
So what did Kant do to dismantle that? How did we lose that?
Well, Kant wanted to secure absolute objective foundations for Newtonian science.
He wanted certainty.
Exactly. So in his critique of judgment, Kant effectively subjectivized aesthetics. He separated aesthetic judgment from conceptual knowledge and moral reality.
He put art in its own little box.
He did. For Kant, when you say a painting is beautiful, you aren't making a claim about the objective truth of the painting. You are merely reporting on the harmony of your own cognitive faculties.
So I'm just talking about myself.
Yes, it's about a disinterested pleasure. The painting merely stimulates a pleasant feeling in you as the subject.
But wait, if Kant turns art into just a personal feeling of pleasure, doesn't that effectively demote the entire humanities?
That is exactly what happens.
It means poetry, literature, and art are just like sophisticated forms of entertainment. They are subjective playgrounds. Meanwhile, the science lab is the only place doing the real work of discovering truth.
You've hit the exact nerve of the problem. Gadamer views Kant's subjectivization of aesthetics as a catastrophic shift.
Catastrophic, that's a strong word.
Because by reducing art to mere subjective pleasure, Kant stripped the human sciences of their unique methodological legitimacy.
Right, if art can't tell us what's true, why study it seriously?
Exactly. If art doesn't convey truth about reality, the humanities have no unique claim to knowledge. So Gadamer's mission in Part 1 is to rescue art from this subjective prison.
He wants to prove that art is doing something real.
He wants to demonstrate that a work of art is an event of truth that science simply cannot access.
Okay, so to rescue art, Gadamer targets a concept he calls aesthetic differentiation.
This is a really important critique.
It's the modern, highly artificial habit of abstracting a work of art from its original life context to appreciate it purely as art.
Right, taking it out of its natural habitat.
Yeah, like taking an altarpiece that was meant to be prayed in front of in a dimly lit cathedral, ripping it out and hanging it under fluorescent lights in a sterile white-walled museum.
And we do that all the time.
We tell ourselves that now, stripped of its religious function, we can finally appreciate its pure aesthetic form.
But Gadamer argues that aesthetic differentiation creates a shadowy, distorted reality. By isolating the work, we destroy the very world it was meant to illuminate.
So a museum is almost like a graveyard for art.
In a way, yes. To counter this, he introduces an ontological concept that completely shifts how we experience art. He introduces the concept of play, or Spiel in German.
Now, when we usually talk about play, we think of human agency, right? Like, a child decides to play with a toy truck. The child is the active subject. The truck is the passive object.
Right, the child directs the game.
But Gadamer completely flips this dynamic.
He flips it entirely. He insists that play is not a subjective attitude of the player.
So the player isn't in charge.
No. The players do not control the game. The game plays the players. It draws them into its dominion.
The game plays the players. That's wild.
The actual subject of play is not the individual playing, but the play itself.
I tried to map this onto a real-world experience, and I thought about a deeply intense jazz improvisation.
Oh, that's a brilliant example.
Or even a gripping high-stakes game of Dungeons and Dragons. When the game is truly happening, the musicians or the players aren't calculating their next move from a detached, objective distance.
No, they lose themselves in it.
Exactly. The structure of the game, the rhythm of the music, it just takes over. The back and forth flow dictates what happens next. You submit to the rules and the rhythm so that the game can manifest itself.
That submission is the key. The game only comes into actual existence through the players allowing themselves to be played by it.
And this applies to art.
Gadamer argues that this is the mode of being of a work of art. A painting or a play is not a dead, passive object waiting for a scientist to dissect it. It is an event.
It's something that happens.
Yes, it is a presentation of Darstellan. It only achieves its full being when it is experienced by an audience that is caught up in its structure.
Okay, and he illustrates this by drawing a really sharp line between a copy, an abild, and a picture or portrait, a build.
This distinction is crucial for him.
Because a copy, like a reflection in a mirror, has no independent life. Its only purpose is to point back to the original object.
Right, it's totally dependent.
The moment you look at a mirror reflection, the mirror itself is supposed to vanish from your attention. A copy effaces itself. But a picture, a true work of art, doesn't just point back. It shares in the being of the original.
Gadamer boldly states that a true picture is an increase in being.
An increase in being, what does that actually mean?
Think about it this way. When a great artist paints a portrait of a king, the painting doesn't just copy the king's physical features. It reveals something essential about the king's majesty or cruelty that might not be visible in everyday life.
Oh, so the painting makes the king more real.
Exactly. The painting adds to the reality of the king.
He also uses architecture to cement this idea that art cannot be severed from its context.
Architecture is his favorite example for this.
Because a building is only a true work of art if it solves an architectural problem in its original life context, right? A church must function as a place of worship. A courthouse must function as a seat of justice.
It has to have a living purpose.
If you build a beautiful cathedral, but nobody ever prays there and it just becomes a tourist trap, it loses its reality. It is no longer participating in the truth of its intended world.
Purpose cannot be separated from the art without destroying its ontology.
It becomes a shadow.
Yes. Now, if we accept that art is a game that plays the audience, and that the truth of the art happens in the present moment of it being experienced, this raises a highly disruptive question regarding the creator.
Right, because if I'm listening to a Beethoven symphony and the truth of the music is happening right now in how the structure of the symphony grips me and plays me, what role does Beethoven actually play?
It's a great question.
Does the artist's original intention even matter?
Gadamer is unrelenting here.
Yeah.
The mens auctoris, the mind of the author, is not the ultimate yardstick for the meaning of a work of art.
That feels almost heretical. We're always taught to ask, what did the author mean?
I know, the romantic idea of the genius artist who magically locks a single eternal meaning into a text or a painting is a flawed concept for Gadamer.
So what is art then, if not the author's meaning?
Art represents a transformation into structure. Once the artist transforms their idea into a concrete structure, a poem, a sculpture, that structure detaches from the author's mind and lives a life of its own.
It's like a child leaving home.
Exactly. It engages in a continuous dialogue with every new audience that encounters it.
Honestly, that is incredibly liberating for anyone who has ever felt intimidated by a classic novel.
Right. You don't need a psychic connection to the author.
You don't have to perfectly guess what Shakespeare was feeling on a Tuesday in 1599 to understand Hamlet. The truth of Hamlet is not locked in Shakespeare's psychology. It is happening in the friction between the play's structure and your current reality.
Beautifully said.
But this brings us to a massive pivot in the text. If we accept that the artist's original intention doesn't dictate the truth of a piece of art, that blows a massive hole in how we study history.
It does. It completely upends historical research.
How can we possibly understand a historical text if we aren't trying to get inside the author's head?
This moves us into part 2 of the text, where Gadamer systematically dismantles the flaws of romantic historical methods.
Let's talk about the history of hermeneutics for a second.
Okay, so historically, hermeneutics, the theory of interpretation, was dogmatic. You interpreted the Bible to align with church doctrine, or you interpreted a law to serve justice.
It had a practical set purpose.
Yes, but in the Romantic era, figures like the theologian Friedrich Schleiermacher revolutionized the field. Schleiermacher famously claimed that the ultimate goal of hermeneutics is to understand a writer better than he understood himself.
Which sounds incredibly arrogant.
It does.
But also, kind of logical at first glance. Like, if I'm reading a letter written by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, shouldn't my primary goal be to reconstruct Lincoln's exact mental state?
You'd think so.
I want to know exactly what he was thinking, what his fears were, what historical pressures were on him. Isn't that what good history is?
Gadamer argues that this is a devastating psychological trap.
A trap.
Yes, because when Schleiermacher made the goal of interpretation, the reconstruction of the author's inner life, he turned hermeneutics into a psychological exercise.
Oh, I see. You stop reading the text and start psychoanalyzing the dead guy.
Exactly. If your only goal is to understand Lincoln's psychology, you are treating his letter merely as an artifact, an expression of his subjective feelings. In doing so, you completely ignore the actual truth claim the letter is making about the world.
Wow. Because I've safely locked his truth away in the 1860s.
Right. You are studying Lincoln, but you are not allowing Lincoln's words to tell you something true about justice or war or human nature that might apply to you today.
I'm observing him like a bug in a jar, rather than having a conversation with him.
A perfect metaphor. And this psychological trap ensnared the entire historical school that followed. Thinkers like Leopold von Ranke and Johann Gustav Droysen.
What did they do?
Droysen believed history was a growing sum of continuity, and the historian's job was endless research to reconstruct the great text of history.
Just putting the puzzle pieces together from the outside.
Yeah. And then you have Wilhelm Dilthey, who tried desperately to provide a solid epistemological foundation for the human sciences based on life and experience.
But Dilthey failed too.
He did. Dilthey wanted to overcome the subjective biases of the historian and reach a universally valid objective historical knowledge. But Dilthey was still infected by the Cartesian demand for scientific certainty.
He still wanted to be a scientist.
He wanted an impossible detached standpoint from which to view history.
He wanted to be a camera floating outside of time.
Yes, the view from nowhere.
But if Dilthey reached a dead end, how do we get out of it?
The breakthrough required a complete philosophical revolution, initiated by Edmund Husserl's phenomenology and brought to fruition by Martin Heidegger.
Heidegger is the turning point here.
He executes a massive shift. He moves philosophy away from epistemology, the question of how we know things, and focuses entirely on ontology, the question of how we exist.
Right. Heidegger introduces the concept of Dasein, right? Human existence.
Yes, Dasein. Heidegger showed that understanding is not just a cognitive tool or a scientific method we pull out of our pockets when we want to read a book.
It's not a pair of glasses we put on.
No. Understanding is the fundamental mode of human existence. We are always already thrown into a world. We exist historically. We are embedded in a language, a culture, and a specific time.
Okay, let me make sure I'm grounding this for you, the listener.
Right.
The Romantic historians, like Schleiermacher and Dilthey, basically wanted to time travel.
It did.
They wanted to scrub away their own modern perspective, leave their own century behind, and perfectly inhabit the past without contaminating it.
Clean, objective history.
Right. But Gadamer, building on Heidegger, says that time travel is not only impossible, it is completely missing the point.
It is an illusion of the highest order. Your historical situation, your present moment, with all its specific cultural baggage, is not a barrier that prevents you from understanding the past.
It's not a dirty window blocking the view.
No, it is the very foundation that makes understanding possible. Think about it. If you could somehow magically erase your own historical identity to read a 16th century text objectively, there would be no you left to understand anything.
Oh, that's heavy.
The text would mean nothing because it would have no present reality to speak into.
Which brings us to a section of the text that absolutely stopped me in my tracks. It is easily the most provocative, controversial argument Gadamer makes.
I know exactly where you're going.
In Part 2, Chapter 4, Gadamer mounts a full-throated, unapologetic defense of prejudice. And not just prejudice, but also authority and tradition.
We have to tread very carefully here, because the German word Vorteil, which translates to prejudice, has been heavily loaded with negative connotations in modern language.
Understandably so.
Of course. But Gadamer argues that the Enlightenment committed a massive intellectual error by imposing what he calls a prejudice against prejudices.
Following Descartes again, the demand for radical doubt.
Always Descartes.
Descartes told us that to find pure, objective truth, we must strip away all our dogmas, all our traditions, and all our prior beliefs. We must start from a completely blank, rational slate.
And Gadamer says that blank slate is a myth. Human beings are fundamentally finite and historical. We cannot step outside of history to view the world from nowhere.
So what are prejudices to him?
Our prejudices are simply our prejudgments. They are the initial historical lenses through which we perceive anything at all.
We literally can't see without them.
Exactly. When you pick up a book, you bring 1,000 prejudgments to it. What a narrative is, how language functions, what human motivations are. Without those prejudices, the book is just random ink stains. Prejudices are our orientation on the world.
Okay, I understand the philosophical logic, but let's be real. You can't just drop a word like prejudice and tell me it's a tool for truth.
It's a tough sell.
It is. In a modern democratic context, defending prejudice sounds like an intellectual loophole for bigotry. It sounds highly conservative, maybe even dangerous. If we rehabilitate prejudice, what stops someone from defending racism or sexism as just their historical orientation?
That's the crucial pushback. But Gadamer is absolutely not defending blind bias or bigotry. The distinction he makes is vital. How do we separate legitimate, truth-producing prejudices from false, distorting prejudices?
Right. How do we tell the good from the bad?
Well, the Enlightenment believed you separated them by retreating into a vacuum of radical doubt.
By trying to wipe the slate clean?
Yes. But Gadamer says that's impossible. We separate them through the friction of engagement.
Okay, give me a tangible example of that mechanism. How does friction burn away a bad prejudice?
Let's say you pick up a scientific treatise or a social commentary written in the 1920s. You bring your modern prejudices to it, your democratic values, your modern scientific knowledge.
Right. I'm reading it as a person in the 21st century.
As you read, you encounter a passage that is deeply jarring. Perhaps an assertion about human biology or social hierarchy that offends your modern sensibilities.
Like some casual 1920s eugenics or something.
Exactly. That feeling of being jarred is the text resisting you.
The text is pushing back against my horizon of expectation.
Exactly. Now, you have a choice. You can either aggressively impose your modern prejudice and simply dismiss the author as an idiot, which means you learn nothing.
Just close the book and walk away.
Right. Or you can allow the text's otherness to put your own prejudice into question. You ask, why did this intelligent person believe this? What was their historical reality?
So I engage with the uncomfortable thing.
Yes. By engaging in that tension, your false prejudices, perhaps an arrogant assumption that modern people are inherently smarter than past generations, are exposed and dissolved.
Because I see the historical context.
Meanwhile, your legitimate prejudices, like your fundamental commitment to human equality, are tested and confirmed, eliminating exactly where the 1920s text failed. You don't get rid of prejudice, you risk it in a dialogue with the text.
To navigate this risk, Gadamer introduces a massive, multisyllable German concept. Wirkungsgeschichtliches Bewusstsein.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
No, thank you. But the translation is historically affected consciousness.
It is the pinnacle of his hermeneutic theory.
What does it actually mean?
Historically affected consciousness is the acute awareness that our consciousness is simultaneously affected by history and brought into being by it.
Like we're swimming in it.
Yes. When we study history, history is already working within us, shaping the very questions we ask. We are embedded in the stream of tradition.
Which brings us to his defense of authority and tradition. Again, the Enlightenment viewed authority as a dogmatic chain around the mind. Kant defined enlightenment as humanity emerging from its self-imposed immaturity, explicitly rejecting the authority of the church and tradition.
And Gadamer redefines authority. He argues that acknowledging authority is not an act of blind submission or abdication of reason.
It's not just following orders.
Not at all. True authority is based on a rational recognition that someone else, a teacher, an expert, or a classic text, has a wider view, a deeper experience, and simply knows more than you do.
Oh, so it's a choice based on respect.
You yield to their insight precisely because your reason recognizes their superiority in that specific domain. It is an act of freedom. And tradition is not dead weight. It is a living continuity that we actively appropriate.
But how do we actually do this? We've talked about engaging the text and risking our prejudices, but what does that look like in practice?
This is where we get to the mechanics of it.
Right, that takes us to section 6, where Gadamer insists on recovering the lost third pillar of traditional hermeneutics.
Yes, this is fascinating historical recovery.
Historically, there was understanding intelligendi, there was interpretation explicandi, and then there was application applicandi. Gadamer says application isn't something you do after you understand a text. It is the very act of understanding itself.
To explain the mechanics of application, Gadamer reaches deep into antiquity, contrasting two Greek concepts from Aristotle. He looks at techne and phronesis.
Okay, let's break those down. What is techne?
Techne translates to technical skill or craftsmanship. If you are a carpenter building a table, you have a static blueprint in your mind. You apply that blueprint mechanically to the wood.
A step-by-step process.
Exactly. The rules of carpentry do not change based on the specific piece of wood. The knowledge is objective and detached.
But human history and literature don't operate like blueprints.
No, they require phronesis, which translates to moral knowledge or practical wisdom.
And how is that different from techne?
Phronesis is entirely different. Moral knowledge cannot be applied mechanically because it requires adapting universal principles to concrete, ever-changing, unpredictable situations.
Right. You might know the universal principle, be honest. But how you apply that principle changes drastically depending on whether you are talking to a judge under oath, your spouse in a delicate argument, or a child asking a difficult question.
That is a perfect illustration.
You don't just execute an algorithm. The specific, messy situation dictates how the rule is applied, and the rule illuminates the situation.
Gadamer makes a brilliant move here. He asserts that legal hermeneutics, the way a judge operates, is the ultimate model for all human understanding.
Legal hermeneutics. Think about a judge applying a constitutional law written 200 years ago to a modern case about internet privacy.
Yes. The judge is not acting as a historical purist, trying to figure out what the founders literally thought about Wi-Fi.
Because the founders couldn't conceive of Wi-Fi.
If the judge did that, the law would be useless.
Totally obsolete.
Exactly. The judge's job is to actively interpret the core truth of the law and apply it to the present reality. By applying it, the judge brings the true, living meaning of the law into the present moment.
He breathes life into it.
Yes. The same goes for a theologian preaching a sermon. They don't give a dry, historical lecture on first-century agrarian society. They take the parable and apply it directly to the struggles of the congregation sitting in the pews today.
Gadamer is making the radical claim that all reading is like this. If you are reading Plato or Shakespeare or a history of the Roman Empire, and you are not actively applying it to your own present horizon, you are not truly understanding it.
You are just accumulating dead facts.
But I have a mechanical question. If I'm sitting in my living room reading Plato, I don't have a defendant in front of me. I'm not drafting a legal ruling. How do I actually practice application?
You practice it through what Gadamer, borrowing from the philosopher R.G. Collingwood, calls the logic of question and answer.
The logic of question and answer.
Yes. To truly understand a text, you must reconstruct the question to which the text is the original answer.
Wait, reconstruct the question.
Every text, no matter how ancient, was written because the author was trying to solve a pressing problem or answer an urgent question in their world. You have to figure out what that question was.
So I have to interrogate the text. I have to be the detective asking the text why it exists.
It's a dual interrogation. You interrogate the text to find its driving question, but crucially, you must also allow the text to question you.
It questions me back.
You must allow its truth claim to challenge your present assumptions. You engage in a dialogue, and this dialogue leads to Gadamer's most famous metaphor, the fusion of horizons.
The fusion of horizons. This is the payoff.
It is. You have your present horizon, your modern prejudices, your historical situatedness.
My world.
And the text brings its own past horizon, its ancient context, its original questions. True understanding is not you abandoning your horizon to jump into the past.
Because we established we can't do that.
Nor is it forcefully dragging the text into the present and ignoring its history. Understanding is the fusion of these two horizons into a new, higher, more expansive understanding.
So they meet in the middle.
They merge. The text speaks into your situation, and your present situation allows the text to reveal new dimensions of its truth that the original author could never have anticipated.
It is a profoundly beautiful concept. It makes reading a classic book feel like a living, breathing conversation rather than a dusty academic chore.
It is entirely alive.
The text is alive because I am alive to interact with it. But this raises the final, ultimate question of the book. What is the medium in which this grand dialogue takes place? Where does this fusion of horizons actually happen?
That brings us to section 7, where Gadamer makes his most sweeping ontological claim. Being that can be understood is language.
That's a huge statement. Language is everything.
Language is not a secondary tool. It is the absolute medium of hermeneutic experience. Gadamer launches a severe critique against the modern instrumentalist view of language.
The instrumentalist view, that's our tendency to think of language as just a set of arbitrary labels we invented to categorize a pre-existing world.
Like slapping Post-it notes on
Yeah.
things.
Right. We think of words as a toolbox. I have a pure abstract thought in my head, and now I will search my toolbox for the correct vocal grunts to transfer that thought to your head.
And Gadamer says that entire model is backwards.
Completely backwards.
We don't control language. Language is the universal horizon in which we live and breathe. Gadamer traces this back to the ancient Greek concept of logos and through Thomas Aquinas' concept of the inner word, the verbum.
So we don't just use language. Language uses us.
We do not exist outside of language and then decide to use it. Language thinks us as much as we think it. Our entire capacity to understand the world is structured by the language we inherit.
He uses translation as the extreme ultimate case of this hermeneutic conversation, doesn't he?
Yes, translation is the perfect example.
If you've ever tried to translate a nuanced poem from Spanish or German into English, you know that a literal word-for-word dictionary algorithm produces total garbage. It destroys the poem.
Because a good translator doesn't just swap nouns. The translator has to participate in the underlying subject matter.
They have to get the vibe.
More than the vibe, they have to understand the truth the poem is gesturing toward, and then completely recreate that truth in the framework of a new language.
Oh, so they are actually doing hermeneutics.
Exactly. The common subject matter is what binds the text, the translator, and the new reader together in a shared fusion of horizons. Language is the arena where the truth of the world presents itself.
This expansive, almost mystical view of language and tradition leads us perfectly into the afterword, where Gadamer faces his fiercest critics.
And we have to address this because the pushback was intense.
Really intense.
Representing the school of critical rationalism, thinkers like Karl Popper, Hans Albert, and most notably Jürgen Habermas took serious issue with Gadamer's philosophy.
What was their main problem with it?
They accused him of being inherently conservative, unscientific, and overly trusting of tradition.
Habermas delivered perhaps the most potent critique, right?
He did. Habermas argued that Gadamer, by relying so heavily on tradition and language as the horizon of truth, completely ignores the dark side of language.
The dark side, meaning language can be manipulated.
Habermas pointed out that language can be systematically distorted. It can be a medium of ideological domination and social power.
Ah, I see. If the people in power control the language.
Exactly. If we just trust the friction of tradition to burn away our bad prejudices, aren't we just perpetuating systemic injustices that are baked into the language itself?
Because the tradition itself is corrupt.
Habermas argued we need an objective, critical, emancipatory science to stand outside of tradition and critique it.
Honestly, I wrestle with Habermas's critique heavily. It feels incredibly relevant today.
It is very compelling.
If our language is built by people who held oppressive power, then yielding to the authority of that language seems like a recipe for maintaining the status quo. How did Gadamer defend himself against this?
Gadamer fired back by pointing out the profound hubris in Habermas's demand for an objective standpoint outside of tradition.
He called his bluff.
He did. Gadamer asks, where exactly is this magical, objective high ground you claim to stand on to critique society? Any critique you formulate must be articulated in language, using concepts inherited from the very tradition you are trying to escape.
You can't amputate the limb you are standing on.
Precisely. You are always inside it. But more importantly, Gadamer argued that the true danger to human freedom is not tradition. It is the technological self-understanding of modern science.
The technological self-understanding.
It is the dangerous illusion that experts, technocrats, and social engineers can rationally manage and manipulate human society from a purely objective standpoint.
Oh, like treating society as a machine to be tuned.
Exactly. Gadamer warns that when we replace phronesis, practical moral wisdom rooted in history, with technical management by experts, we destroy human agency.
We treat human beings as raw data to be optimized, rather than historical agents engaging in a dialogue.
That is his core warning.
That is a chilling warning that feels more relevant now than when he wrote it. But to summarize this entire journey, if science cannot give us the ultimate truth about human existence, and we are completely bound by our finite historical language, are we just trapped?
That's the fear, isn't it?
Yeah, are we just floating in a subjective soup of our own cultural biases, never able to reach a universal truth?
Gadamer's ultimate conclusion is that we are not trapped. We are enabled.
Enabled.
Yes. The finite nature of our understanding, our historical limitations, our prejudices, our specific language, is the very mechanism that allows meaning to occur.
Without the limits, there is no shape.
The dialogue of understanding is infinite. Because we are historical, the truth of the world can reveal itself to us in endless, new, completely valid ways. The conversation never ends, and that is precisely what allows the beautiful and the true to constantly emerge as an event in our lives.
It transforms limitation from a bug into a feature. Our finitude isn't a wall blocking us from the truth. It is the lens that brings the truth into focus.
Exactly. Without the lens, there is no vision.
Let's bring this all together for a comprehensive summary. We have covered immense ground today.
We really have.
We started by rescuing the human sciences from the suffocating grip of the inductive scientific method, realizing that true experience, Erfahrung, is not a collectible snapshot, but a painful, expansive transformation of the self.
We explored how art is not an object of detached aesthetic pleasure, but an ontological game that plays us.
We dismantled the romantic illusion of time-traveling historical methods, recognizing that the author's original psychology is not the ultimate arbiter of meaning.
We mounted a rigorous defense of our prejudices and traditions, seeing them not as chains of ignorance, but as the very orientation points of our perception.
We learned that understanding is always an act of application, like a judge dynamically applying the law, using the logic of question and answer to achieve a fusion of our horizon with the text's horizon.
And finally, we saw that all of this profound interaction takes place in the universal, inescapable medium of language.
The ultimate takeaway of Gadamer's truth and method is a call to humility and openness.
A profound openness.
It is a reminder to you that every conversation you have, every ancient text you read, and every piece of art you admire is not a dead object waiting for your critical dissection.
It is a voice from another horizon.
Yes. Asking you a question, waiting for you to risk your prejudices, apply its truth to your own life, and allow your world to be permanently widened.
It fundamentally changes how you interact with reality.
You are not a detached scientist observing a petri dish. You are an active participant in an ongoing, grand historical dialogue. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over a question that builds on Gadamer's work but propels us directly into the immediate future.
It's a question we all have to face.
If language is the absolute limit of what we can understand, if language is the very horizon of being, and artificial intelligence is now mastering our language, predicting our syntax, and generating text with flawless fluency, yet it does so without having any historical experience, without undergoing any Erfahrung, without possessing any Dasein or finitude of its own, what happens to the truth of our hermeneutic conversations? When we engage in a fusion of horizons with a text generated by a machine that has no horizon, who or what is playing the game now,